All right, it's 4 o'clock, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started. You are here for Dr. Natasha Barnes. She's going to be talking about autoregulation and injury risk reduction and strength training, which I'm super psyched to introduce you for because it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, something that strength training's been really important to my longevity as an athlete. So I love the content you put out, Natasha. I've been a fan for a long time. I'm going to give like a 3 to 5 minute intro, so bear with me, and then we'll get to Natasha and her knowledge base, which is the real reason why you're here. So my name's Shannon O'Grady. I'm the COO and Director of Product for Gnarly Nutrition. And for those of you that don't know, Gnarly produces science-backed products for athletes. We have a complete line of NSF and NSF for sport certified products. We pride ourselves on creating effective and transparent products that also taste pretty good. So kind of if something doesn't taste good, you won't be motivated to take it and to use it. And so we want you to enjoy the product as much as have an efficacious product. We've started this new campaign, which is longevity in sport, topics all surrounding injury prevention, everything from what Natasha's talking about today to nutrition, self-assessment of injuries, everything from climbing clinics to running clinics. So if you haven't checked out our full lineup, please go to our website. We've got, for the next 2.5 weeks, just a really great lineup of experts and athletes talking about really relevant topics. We're also, during this time period, in the midst of the launch of our new product, Gnarly Collagen Pro, and research supports a role of collagen supplementation, along with a number of other protocols in the prevention of injury and the repair of injury specific to tendons, ligaments, and joints. So if you haven't checked out our product, Gnarly Collagen Pro, or seen kind of what it's all about, our website is another great resource for that. And I'm actually giving the same clinic format on that product and some others that we're launching in a couple of weeks. So please tune in for that. Following the clinic, we'll be emailing you a recording of the clinic. So if you can't stay for the whole thing, or in the case that you weren't able to make it today, we're going to email it right to you. So you can, take notes a second time or rewatch or watch for the first time if you missed it. We'll also have a discount coupon for Gnarly Collagen Pro if you want to try the product. So look out for that email. We've definitely been getting feedback from people that have missed it because it's gone to their spam or junk email. So you should get it by this time tomorrow. So keep an eye out for it. If you don't see it, check your spam and junk email folders. The last couple of items that I want you to be aware of. So starting November 30th, we're going to do a pretty amazing giveaway, all kind of rehab products that have to do with longevity. So watch out for that. You will find the details on Instagram. And then if you enjoy this clinic, which I don't doubt that you will, please take a minute to screenshot, a slide that Natasha presents or something interesting that you learned, tag Gnarly Nutrition, tag Natasha, and post it on all your favorite social media channels. We really want as many people as possible to really benefit from this clinic lineup, and that's a great way to expose people to the knowledge that is going to be presented. We'll also have a short survey at the end of the clinic and give feedback for Natasha on what you really enjoyed, what you learned, and we'll share that with her. And then finally, there's a Q&A. If you swipe down on your Zoom feed, you'll see a Q&A highlight. So there's a chat box in the Q&A. If you have a question that you want Natasha to address at the end of her talk, if you would please put it in the Q&A box, and then I'm going to help her kind of go through those at the end of the talk and try to get to as many questions as we can. Okay, so now what you're really waiting for, I'm happy to introduce Dr. Natasha Barnes. She's going to be talking about autoregulation and injury risk reduction and strength training. Dr. Natasha Barnes has been climbing for 22 years and has been coaching climbers for 20. She is a doctor of chiropractic and a board-certified physiotherapist in California. Natasha helps empower climbers to train smart and build resiliency through strength training and science-based programming. She also specializes in rehabilitation for climbers and has been helping climbers overcome injury for almost a decade. She is a former bouldering national champion and a gold medalist in the Tiva Games, IFSC Vail World Cup, and has sent multiple V10s and V11s as well as 513D 14As outdoors. She is also a nationally ranked competitive powerlifter. Damn impressive. And in 2019, she was the Submasters National Powerlifting Champion with personal best of a 320-pound squat, 187-pound bench press, and a 385-pound deadlift. So super well-rounded too, and super impressive. So I'm gonna now mute myself and turn off my camera and turn it over to Natasha. Thanks so much.
Awesome, thanks Shannon. That was a great introduction. Okay, you guys, I'm just gonna go ahead and share my screen because I have a presentation that I'm gonna show you. And let me just get it up. Just give me a moment to get this presentation going. Okay, here we go. Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, so this talk's going to be about injury risk reduction. We're also going to talk about autoregulation. Oops. Shannon already gave a really good introduction for me, so I won't go through all of this, but just so you guys know a little bit more where I'm coming from. So kind of through trying to resolve my own climbing injuries, I discovered barbell strength training, and I've just been blown away by the results that I've gotten from incorporating that and just by making my body stronger and building some resiliency. So it is teaching my clients how to get stronger has now become a large component of my rehab and coaching practice. So it's kind of where I'm coming from. Shannon already talked about all these other things here, so I'll just get to it. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about some myths around injury prevention. We're also going to talk about some things that can actually help reduce your risk of injury. And then we're also going to talk about autoregulation. And just like Shannon said, I'm going to do an Instagram challenge actually. So I would love if you guys could screenshot anything that you like from this presentation or yourself watching it, tag Gnarly Nutrition, tag me. Everyone who tags me today and tomorrow, I'm going to put you guys into a drawing to win my foundational strength training for climbers program, which is an 8-week strength program. It's a strength training movement guide as well as a program, and it's going to also teach you a little bit more about how to use autoregulation, and it's $147 value. So if you want to participate in that, would love to see you tag me on Instagram. So let's get into some of the myths around injury prevention. These aren't like all of the myths, but they're just like a few of the big ones that I hear a lot of people talk about or that people always ask me questions about. So I want to make sure we address them. So myth number one, there's kind of this myth that stretching can prevent injury and like help with recovery. And that's not exactly true. So if we look at this, there's a study, a good study here that talks about this. Stretching does not prevent injury. We've got a lot of evidence around this now. This is just one of the studies that I chose to show you guys here. It's Larson et al. 2013. If you guys, I'm going to mention a few studies in this talk. So if you guys want links to that study, let me know in the comments and I'll make sure that I send a list of my of all the studies that I'm mentioning here to Gnarly Nutrition. They can send those out to you guys. But this study looked, it's actually a meta-analysis, systematic review and meta-analysis that looked at 25 trials. There were 26,000 participants. They looked at 3,400 injuries, and they looked at these interventions. They looked at proprioceptive training, they looked at strength training, and they looked at stretching. Proprioceptive training is just like balance training. And what they found was stretching did not show any protective effect against injury, while strength training proved highly significant. I think proprioceptive training did okay too, but strength training really stood out in this study. And then there's other studies that do show that strength training does reduce sports injuries to less than a third. So that's a 66% decrease. And overuse injuries could be halved just by incorporating strength training. So if I could hand you like a pill that would give you like a 66% decrease in injury, like, would you take that pill? I definitely would, and I am, and it's strength training. So big plus for strength training there, and not so much for stretching, unfortunately. Myth number 2, lifting or climbing with bad form causes injury. This is a big myth. So bad form is kind of a myth, and it doesn't actually or like what we would consider, what some people would consider bad form is actually not, is we don't actually know like what is good and bad form. We don't actually know. And we don't actually have any good evidence to determine like what is injurious, what injurious or what non-injurious form is. It turns out there is a lot of variability in movement and in the human population. Like different bodies are going to have different strategies for moving, and we can't really say one is better than the other, or one is wrong and one is right. If you look at these pictures here, the top picture is Hafthor Bjornsson, who currently has the all-time deadlift world record. He deadlifted 501 kilograms, which is 1,105 pounds. And he does it with a rounded back, and he doesn't have any back injuries. He doesn't have back pain. He has the world record. And so are we really going to tell Thor that he's deadlifting wrong and that he should fix his back position? This man has the world record. And actually a lot of competitive powerlifters do deadlift with a rounded back. And part of it is because it actually is more mechanically advantageous to do that. It keeps the bar closer to your center of mass. But a lot of people would tell you that deadlifting with a rounded back is dangerous, and if you do it, you're going to get an injury, and that's not actually true. And we don't have evidence that supports that. Injury has a lot more to do with whether or not you're adapted to a certain load or a certain position. So Thor has been lifting like this forever, and his body has adapted to it. Perfect form it's also kind of an ableist concept if you think about it. It doesn't really take into account your body's ability to adapt to stress. And a really good example of that is if you look at this bottom photo, this is Lamar Gant. He is a world record holding powerlifter. This is a photo of him in 1985, deadlifting 661 pounds at 132 pounds of body weight. Small guy, really strong, first person in the world to ever have deadlifted 5 times his own body weight. And he has a very significant scoliosis. He can't deadlift with a straight back, and he also does it with a pretty rounded back. And so if we tried to tell him that his form is bad and he's not doing it with perfect form and he's going to get hurt and he's not going to do it right, like how can we say that to him? He literally cannot do it with a straight back. He doesn't have the ability to do that. Yet he's a world record holding powerlifter who, as far as I know, doesn't have any back injuries. So we really have to be careful about perfect form, because a lot of people can do a lot of things with form that's not perfect and they don't get hurt. Also, being hyper vigilant about perfect form can actually be harmful, and we have research that shows us this. Perfectionism actually can increase your risk of injury. So the more worried you are about moving perfectly or being in the correct position, the more likely you actually are to get injured. So that's an important thing to know. I want to show you these photos. So these, I love these photos from circuit climbing and from other places on the internet. I just screenshotted their Instagram, so I hope they don't mind. I love these photos because they post photos of like high level climbers. Like these are World Cup climbers. These are world class climbing athletes in positions that a lot of people would tell you are wrong or bad or dangerous. Yet these people are winning climbing competitions. These people do not have injuries as far as I know, as far as any of us know. And they're performing at a very high level. And that's because your body can adapt to anything if it's dosed appropriately. And these people have been climbing for a really long time. They've been in these positions before. Their body is able to handle these positions, and they're just strong. And the stronger you are, the better able you're going to be to handle weird positions that we get into for climbing. Climbing is so variable. So especially for climbing, it's hard to say like what is right and wrong positions, because you're gonna always get into some weird position for climbing, and you just have to be able to handle it. And so these are really good examples. And if you guys know Maureen Beck, top right corner here, you guys probably know her from Real Rock. She's a pretty famous climber. She was born without a hand. I think if we told her that if she keeps climbing with her elbow bent like that, she's going to get bicep tendonitis or elbow pain or something like that, that would be wrong, right? Like she clearly doesn't have those problems, and she was born like that. She's been climbing like that. She was able to adapt to climbing like that, and she's fine. So we really have to be careful when we talk about like what good and bad form is, what's right or wrong, because a lot of times we don't have evidence for it. We do have, we can say that like there's positions to get into that can help you become a little bit more biomechanically, to leverage, biomechanics a little bit more. But we really can't say like what's safe and not safe, because it really just comes down to like what you're adapted to and what you're not adapted to with this stuff. So your body is not a machine that wears out or breaks down. You are a living organism that can adapt to the stresses imposed on you. So the difference between you and a machine is that, or you and a car, a lot of people like to use a car as like an analogy for like, your body breaking down. The difference between you and a car is that you're not a machine. Machines can't adapt, but bodies can. And we have a lot of evidence for this. If those pictures previously weren't enough evidence for you, we've done studies, we've MRI'd Olympic weightlifters' knees in the beginning of the season. We get a picture of their ACL. At the end of the season, we get a picture of their ACL. And at the end of the season, their ACL is larger because that ligament adapts to the stress that they're placing upon it. I couldn't find the picture for this, but I really wanted to, because there's also one case study that I've seen where a kid was actually born without a tibia, which is the biggest bone in your lower leg. It's the weight-bearing bone in your lower leg. He was born without it, and he had a fibula though, which is the other smaller bone in your lower leg. And so they did a surgery to move his fibula to where his tibia would be. And then over time, as he like rehabbed and as he started walking on the leg and as he grew up, his fibula turned into a tibia. Like it actually got thicker and grew bigger and turned into a weight-bearing bone. Like that's how powerful our body is at adapting. So I want you guys to know that. And I like to break down these myths just because it does empower people. It does make them less afraid of their body. It does make them less afraid of stress. And if you're an athlete, like we need to stress you. That's how you're going to get stronger. So that's why I'm talking about this stuff first. And myth number 3, this is a big one too. Climbers need to do opposition and antagonist training, or antagonist training, however you want to call it. I've heard it called opposition training. I've heard it called antagonist training, whatever you want to call it, to prevent injury. Now, where does this come from? This comes from like people saying things like, oh, your forearm extensors are weaker than your forearm flexors because we overuse forearm flexors as climbers. Therefore, if we want to prevent elbow injuries, we have to strengthen our extensors, and that's what's going to prevent injury. And these kinds of myths are actually just not true. So opposition antagonistic training. So it really comes down to like people trying to fix so-called muscular imbalances, or like working smaller stabilizer muscles is like another one that I've heard from people. And it turns out that like people are not symmetrical, and especially athletes. Like athletes tend to have imbalances that are normal. And part of the problem with looking at imbalances is that like a lot of these are tested with like manual muscle testing. You go to a PT, they test you, and those don't really lack precision or sensitivity when it comes to like actually measuring deficits. So, you know, if we're using machines to test it, that's a little bit more precise. But also asymmetry is just kind of normal. And there's a study here that shows the difference in rock climbers' internal and external rotator cuff muscles. And there's just a functional difference. Like it's normal for us to have an imbalance between those muscles, and it's just an adaptation to the sport. So asymmetry is very normal, especially if you're competing in a highly, not even competing, if you're participating in a highly specialized sport, it's normal. And a lot of it can be an adaptation to the sport. And this goes for like also like correcting posture, correcting like scapular position. A lot of these things are just an adaptation to sport, and we do have research to support that. We have research that shows that the longer you've been climbing and the harder you've been climbing, the more likely you are to have what's called climber's posture. And it's just an adaptation to the sport, and it doesn't actually predispose you to shoulder injury. And we have research on other overhead sports that show the same thing. Things like hamstring to quad ratio, these are kind of like things that people look at, like how strong is your hamstring compared to your quad, and like we need to make that symmetrical. Those things are kind of antiquated. They're unsubstantiated metrics. We don't really use them anymore because there's so much variability between athletes and between, you know, depending on the sport that you do and all of these things. So we don't really have to do training that fixes these muscular imbalances. What's going to help a little bit more is just strength training, like just getting stronger and just training in a well-rounded way, so that you have more capacity to do the things that you want to do. You have more tissue tolerance in the joints, ligaments, and everything that we're stressing and climbing to do the things that you want to do. Yeah, and so the only time it really matters, like there are some times where symmetry can matter, and the only time that it would matter is if you have like an ACL surgery or something, and we want to see your limb symmetry index. We want to see the injured side or the surgical side, at least 90% of the other side, if we want to have good outcomes. And that can definitely matter, but for normal people, these things don't really matter. And not to bash on Alex Puccio, obviously she's awesome. I just used this photo because I thought you guys could relate to it, because she's doing the classic banded external rotation. Not that this exercise is bad, but this is one of the exercises that people will do as like working the stabilizers or antagonistic training. And the problem with these exercises is that they are substantially underdosed as well. So a lot of the opposition or antagonistic training that people do is just not hard enough. And we really need our training to be hard enough. It needs to match or actually like exceed what we're doing in the sport if we want it to be effective. And we just can't really do that with exercises like this. And I don't know if Tyler's watching, but you guys if you guys follow Tyler Nelson, Camp for Human Performance, he's always bashing on the TheraBar for like elbows. That thing also is just like, it's just underdosed. It's not worth your time. There's other things that we could be doing that matter more. So just want to throw it out there. This is just one study that shows that. I have a list of studies. I also have an article on my website, if you guys want to go take a look at it, that talks a little bit more about climber posture and imbalances and posture and all of that. So truth bomb, preventing injuries is actually impossible. We have to change like our wording around this because we can't prevent injuries. Well, there are things that we can do to mitigate our injury risk though. So instead of saying prevent injuries, we say we can reduce our risk of injury. And that subtle change in the way we talk about that is important, because we're just not going to prevent injuries. Preventing pain is just unrealistic. It's impossible. Pain and injury are just part of the human experience. Setbacks are an inevitable part of training as an athlete. That doesn't mean if you participate in sports, it's guaranteed that you're going to have some catastrophic injury or something like that. But like, setbacks just happen and we can't always prevent them. And I think just understanding how to handle injuries in general and understanding the things that do affect whether or not you're going to get an injury is important. And like improving in sports, like we have to apply a training, like more and more training stimulus over time to like induce adaptation. And that just comes with risk. And hopefully we're doing it in a way that's smart, but like we can't always control everything that's going on here. So I just want to set some realistic expectations for everybody on that. Okay, so why do injuries happen? There's like a few reasons that we know for sure. Overtraining or dosage issues can lead to injury. So if you're doing too much, too soon, more than your body can handle, that can sometimes lead to an injury. If you're not sleeping enough, generally athletes need at least 8 hours of sleep to recover. If you're not sleeping enough, that can definitely contribute. If you're under eating, under fueling, you're not eating the right things to support your training, that can definitely lead to injury sometimes. And if you've had a previous injury, we do have some data that says a previous injury sometimes increases your risk of actually getting an injury in the future. Stress, your body really doesn't know the difference between training stress and like emotional stress or, work stress. You got to fight in a fight with your partner or something like that. Your body doesn't really know the difference, and stress affects it, whether it's like you're doing too much training or whether you're just emotionally really stressed out. That can really affect your body too. And sometimes shit just happens. We can't always predict why. Humans are kind of like the weather. We're dynamical systems. There's so many things that contribute to why certain things happen to us that we can't always predict or control every single one of these things. And we don't always understand why people get injuries. It just happens sometimes. And it kind of doesn't matter. Like once you have an injury, you just have it. And as long as we know how to deal with it, you're going to be okay. So what can actually help reduce your risk? I'm just going to take a sip of my tea here. So load management can definitely help. Fatigue management can definitely help. This comes down to like smart programming. So having better psychosocial coping skills. So not panicking when you get an injury, not getting overwhelmed when you get an injury, having support when you get an injury. Having support in general is going to help reduce your risk of injury anyway, whether or not you have an injury. Strength training, like I said before, we have evidence that shows that it can decrease your injury risk by 66%. So that's a big one as well. Incorporating strength training into your training, no matter what kind of athlete you are, is going to be really helpful. So I want to talk a little bit more about load management and auto-regulation. So most non-contact injuries are related to poor management of training load. And what is training load? Training load is the accumulative amount of stress that can be physiological, psychological, or mechanical that's placed on an individual in a single training session or from multiple training sessions over a period of time. And there's multiple things we can look at here. If you guys were at Tyler's talk, he talked a little bit about this, external and internal load. External load is going to be like absolute weight on the bar, the sets, the reps. So an example would be like lifting 200 pounds for 8 reps is an external load. Or even like running 3 miles at a specific pace, that's an external load. It's more of like an endurance or different kind of sport, but that's also an external load. Internal load is the athlete's perceptual and physiological response to the external load. So an example is like, how hard did that feel? How hard was that session? How hard was that set? What is your heart rate? RPE, things like that are going to be internal load. So a couple things to look at there. And so this brings in the idea of autoregulation. So what is autoregulation? So it's just a tool to select and adjust training intensity based on your performance in a given training session. So it just allows for some flexibility in your training. So whether you're having a good day or a bad day, you can still have a training session that is appropriate for you based on how you're performing in that session. It can help reduce the risk of injury because it does help us manage load and fatigue more appropriately. And it just makes training sustainable. It just kind of ensures that you don't accumulate too much fatigue so that you can keep training and progressing for a really long time. So for strength training, a lot of times what people will do is like, let's test your 1 rep max, or let's do some kind of test. And then the prescription will be like, okay, do 3 sets of 3 at 85% or whatever the percentage may be, or 95%, whatever the coach is going to prescribe. The problem with that is the 1 rep max that test might not be valid for you every day. So that let's say it's 95%. If you're supposed to do 95% of a 1 rep max, like one day that could be 95% for you. Another day it could be 110% for you. And another day it could actually just be like 85% or 80% for you even. And so, depending on what's going on day to day for you, that dose might not be appropriate for you. So autoregulation lets us just make a call on the fly during the session so that we can make sure that the dose of stress is appropriate for you, because we know a lot of things can affect how you're feeling in a training session. So we know that a few things can vary session to session in training. So we know for a fact, just from research, that your strength levels can vary day to day. Your fatigue levels can vary day to day, and therefore your performance is going to vary day to day. And that's for a number of reasons. That could be nutrition, that could be sleep related, that could be stress related, that could be so many different things that can play into how you're feeling session to session. And we need to have some kind of system to take that into account so that your training is more sustainable for you, because that's going to help us manage the load. So there's a few kind of methods that we can use to regulate intensity in autoregulation. So RPE is one of them. RPE just stands for rating of perceived exertion. And it's just a scale where you can rate your exertion level. You can also use session RPE. So SRPE just stands for session RPE. So RPE we would use for maybe like a specific exercise. Session RPE, we're looking at the whole session and how you felt, how hard you felt you tried during that session. We can also look at reps in reserve. So that's how many reps you have left in the tank on an exercise. We can also use velocity-based training, so like speed on the bar or something like that to gauge the intensity. And the fact that a lot of like autoregulation research, RPE research is done, is validated through velocity-based training, should tell you something. Velocity-based training is a pretty good way to measure it as well. So here is an RPE chart. I'm not going to go through this whole chart with you. This is from Barbell Medicine. I didn't feel like making my own, so I just screenshotted theirs, but that's where this comes from. The blue one here is for strength training exercises, the green one here. So you can apply RPE not only to strength exercises, but to like endurance sports, running and stuff like that. And so that's what the green chart is. This is going to talk more about like what you would look at for running. So RPE typically goes from a scale from 0 to 10. 10 being like a maximal effort, like you've got nothing left in the tank, it's bone on bone. And then, you know, a 0 or 1 would be super, super easy. For our purposes, for strength training purposes, we generally don't use anything like below 5 or 6, because that's all going to be warm-up weight. That's going to be super submaximal. And you know, the farther away we are from like a 10, the less accurate it can be too. So we just don't usually go much lower than a 5 or a 6. For strength training purposes, generally we're going to stay in probably somewhere between like the 6 and the 9 RPE area for most strength exercises. There's no reason for us to prescribe a 10, and 9 we're only going to use for certain things where we need the intensity to be that high. And, you know, for any kind of strength training, like we really don't need to be pushing to max out. You don't have to go that hard. You just have to get close to failure. You don't actually have to go to failure to get stronger. And you won't get better results by doing that either. Like you're going to get just as good of results going to an RPE 8 as you are going to an RPE 10. And that's like a really hard thing for a lot of people, because I think we're just like programmed to believe doing more and going harder is better. But the only thing that you're getting out of doing more, going harder, is you're just accumulating more fatigue, and that's gonna add up, and that's going to make you stop adapting to the program, because you're just not going to be able to adapt to that much stress. You're going to accumulate too much fatigue, and that can increase your risk of injury. And like oftentimes the program stops working if you're overshooting your intensity. So for strength training, even for like really hard bouldering, for training for bouldering, for hangboarding and stuff like that, we don't really need to go to failure to get the benefit. And so, yeah, that's where RPE can come in handy. So and we can use reps in reserve is kind of what I use to prescribe RPE. So like if I say, I want you to do a set of 8 at RPE 8, that means you're going to work up to a weight where for a set of 8, where you've got 2 more reps left in the tank. If you look at this chart here, generally going to be pretty heavy, generally going to see some slowdown in bar speed on like a video, you're going to feel it. So kind of essentially like a 10 rep max, but we're only going to do it for 8 reps. And that's just kind of a way of like managing the load, managing fatigue for people. And it allows you to take into account your daily fluctuation in performance. So, you know, on some days that could be a PR weight, on some days it's not, and that's okay. Especially for athletes who are interested in doing other sports like climbing or mountain sports or running or whatever it may be. We don't actually really care about the weight on the bar. We just care that you're training at the right intensity to get the benefit of the training. And so the weight on the bar actually doesn't really matter. And if you're brand new to training, like you probably will be able to increase the weight on the bar session after session for a little while, but that slows down after a while. And so just prescribing RPE just allows us to get the athlete to the right intensity. I don't know if you guys have ever looked at Eva Lopez's research, or if you guys know about her. If you don't, she's awesome. She's a Spanish climber who she literally has her PhD on finger strength training, which is rad. She also climbs like I think 14C or 14D. She's really strong. But yeah, she has the only real research that we have on finger strength training for climbing, and she has certain protocols that she uses for that strength training. And I bring it up because she does actually incorporate a way of auto-regulating the finger strength training in her program. So if you've seen her programs, this is kind of what they look like. This is an example here. If you've never done it before, or no one's ever explained what this means to you, it can definitely look like algebra. Not going to go through and explain what this whole thing means because it's not a hangboard workshop, but the thing that I want you to pay attention to here is, so this number here, this 10, that's your hang time. So in this protocol, she wants you to hang for 10 seconds. And the really, really important part to keep in mind is this number here. So this is the effort level or the margin. I just call it the margin. So in this protocol, she wants you to hang for 10 seconds with a 3-second margin, meaning you would have 3 more seconds left in the tank before failure. So essentially kind of looking for a 13-second max, but we're only going to hang it for 10. And this is a really hard concept for a lot of climbers because they're like, wait, it doesn't feel super hard. Like, I feel like I have more energy left. I don't feel totally worked after this session. Is this really going to help? And it does. And it does make it, it's hard enough that you do get stronger from it. But the benefit is you can do these protocols for a really long time because you don't accumulate excess fatigue. And so it makes the training more sustainable. And so in this protocol, you're either going to move to the smallest possible edge for this parameter, or you're going to add enough load to get to this parameter here. And so her programs incorporate a way of auto-regulating finger strength training, which I really like. I use it personally. I use it with my clients, and really good results and no injuries. So pretty awesome. And if you're familiar with that, then you're familiar with auto-regulation already, because that's what it is. Okay, so I want to talk about the pros and the cons of using RPE, because there are some pros and cons here. So the cons are, it does take a little bit of time to calibrate. But you will get better at it. So it does take a little bit of time to teach this to people. I find that some people err on the side of being too conservative and other people err on the side of being too aggressive. But eventually, as they think about their training in this way, they start to come to a happy medium, and they figure it out, and it works really, really well. But it does take a little bit of time to calibrate. You're probably not going to get it on day one. I mean, unless you're really, really in tune with your body, you might not get it on day one, and that's okay. And then we can't really use RPE necessarily like for power training. So like, I can't say like, okay, I want you to do a snatch at RPE 6. Because if you know how many reps you have left in the tank, then that weight is probably too heavy for power training. So velocity-based training works a little bit better for power or speed training than RPE does. So if you're trying to do something like velocity-based training, velocity-based training will work better for speed stuff, is basically what I'm trying to say. You can put fatigue stops on stuff, like you can tell people to stop when they start to feel like they're slowing down, and some people are really good at that and some people aren't. So that's just one of the cons. The pros are the RPE does account for variability in performance, like we talked about. It's free. You don't have to have any extra equipment for it. I think the cheapest you can get like velocity-based training, like anything that you want to do velocity-based training with, is like $400. For RPE, it's totally free. If you can count to 10, you can do it. And you don't have to test every session or every week to figure out where you should be for your training. You can go by feel, and you can really gauge how you're feeling during the session, which I think is really important. As an athlete, I think it's important to have that, to be in touch with how the training is making you feel and how outside variables may be affecting your performance. So I think it's just a good skill to have as an athlete. And you don't actually have to have perfect accuracy for RPE. So velocity-based training is more accurate, but RPE is actually accurate enough. And they've done research to compare this. So RPE works pretty well. You don't have to do velocity-based training for this stuff. If you want to, you can. It is a little bit more accurate, but you don't have to. And then RPE, this kind of training actually does like help with autonomy and self-efficacy, which I think is really important. I want to promote this in all of my athletes, especially my rehab clients. I want them to have some self-efficacy and feel like they can make some decisions around their training. It's just better for outcomes. It just makes people more engaged with the training. It's better for a lot of different reasons. And like I said before, RPE just makes your training more sustainable. So instead of doing like percentage-based training, or instead of me as the coach telling you what you should lift, you get to make that decision, and it makes it more sustainable. I think that's pretty close to the end here. So I just wanted to mention, if you guys are interested in doing programs that are auto-regulated, or you're interested in learning more about auto-regulation, I am doing a Black Friday sale starting Monday of my training programs. And I've got a foundational strength training program for climbers. I have a strong at home program, which is for climbers who have little to no equipment at home. It's a strength program. I've got a finger strength training guide that talks a little bit more about auto-regulation and finger strength training. And it also has a program in there for you to follow. And I've got a bouldering program that incorporates strength training and bouldering training and climbing drills all in one. All of these are going to be for sale for Black Friday. And then I also do, if you're interested in working with me, I also do climbing and strength coaching. I also help people with custom training plans. I do coaching intensives. And of course, I do rehab consultations and rehab coaching for any athletes, especially climbers, who need help with any injuries. And that's it, you guys. Thank you for attending. I wish we had time to go into more of like the programming side of how to use auto-regulation, and I can definitely do a workshop in the future about that. So if anyone is interested, like leave a comment and let me know. Yeah, I mean, there's only so much we can cover in like an hour. So I want to leave a little bit of time for a Q&A, and I just want to thank you guys all for attending. Would love to hear your biggest takeaways. If you guys are watching this, you know, screenshot, take a photo of yourself watching this and let me know. Reach out to me on Instagram. Let me know what your biggest takeaways are. I'm going to answer some questions here, but if I don't get to them, or you think of them later, or you're watching the replay, feel free to message me on Instagram.
We can also, Natasha, if you want to share your presentation, we can also include that in the email that we send out to everybody, so they have that information on hand. So
yeah, definitely. So I'll send them my presentation. I also have a list of some of the studies that I mentioned here. Some of the ones that I didn't like specifically mention, but some of the statements that I made are from certain studies. So I can send like a list of some of those resources if people are interested in checking those out for themselves.
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, so let's jump into the questions. So the first one from Catherine: does antagonist training always mean trying to perfectly even out muscle imbalances, or just using the opposite muscles, so working push muscles to supplement all the pulling from climbing?
Yeah, it's not necessarily about that. It's not necessarily like fixing push versus pull muscles. It's more about just becoming a more well-rounded athlete, doing supplemental training that's at an intensity that's going to support the sport that you're doing. And then just training to be a more well-rounded athlete, like in general. Climbing is a really specialized sport, and we really only do train our bodies in a really specific way for climbing. And so that's why strength training is helpful, because it's a really potent, time-saving way to get stronger and build resiliency, build capacity, and just build tissue tolerance and some of these structures that we stress a lot in climbing. So I wouldn't think of it as much of like trying to fix an imbalance or trying to make like a certain push-pull ratio. We actually don't have research for push-pull ratios. We don't have anything that supports any kind of push-pull ratio, like preventing injury. So we don't have to think about it that way. I want you guys to think about it more in the way of like, what can I do that can support my climbing that's at the right intensity, that's going to help prepare my body for climbing.
With auto-regulating, if we are leaving room in the tank, how do we know when it's appropriate to increase the load? Is it when the reserve time goes from 3 seconds to 4, or when we feel we have 3 more reps reserve versus 2?
Yeah, so if for in my example, I said like do a set of 8 at RPE 8, which would mean you have 2 more reps left in the tank. We can do that for any rep range, set of 4, whatever. Yeah, if you're warming up and you hit the same weight you hit last week and you're like, oh, that actually feels like easier. I feel like I've got more in the tank, then yeah, you can go up in weight. And if the training's being dosed appropriately, like you should be able to make some kind of increase week to week. And you should be able to go up a little bit. Most people can go up like 5 or 10% weekly if they're adapting well to the training program, but not always. And that just depends on your fatigue, your sleep, your nutrition, all of these other things. But yeah, in general, like you'll be able to tell because you can hit that weight and you'll know that it feels easier. You feel like you have more reps left in the tank, or you'll hit some kind of like reference weight that will tell you. So when I'm lifting, like for example, when I'm deadlifting, I have like a specific weights that I hit as I'm warming up, and I hit those weights every time I do a deadlift session. And I go up to a heavy enough weight that it's not so heavy that it's like a working set or hard. It's just heavy enough that it gives me some information on how I'm feeling and how I'm performing that day. And based on how that weight feels, I can make some decisions on like what weights I should be hitting in my training session. I generally recommend that people go into their training session. It's good to have a target weight. So I always target to go a little bit heavier than I did last time, or have like some kind of target weight in mind. And then you can go into the session with that target weight in mind. But as you're warming up, you're going to know pretty quickly, like if you need to adjust, like, oh, wow, I'm feeling freaking awesome today. And like, actually, I'm probably going to hit more than that. Or like, oh, I'm feeling a little tired today. Maybe I'm not going to go quite as heavy. You'll find a way of like warming up, and you'll probably naturally just have target weights that you start hitting that will give you that information. And I think a lot of people do that when they're climbing too. Like you hit, I do like the V0, the V2, the V4, and you kind of know how you're feeling that day a little bit based off of that. So something like that.
With that, Natasha, just a question I have based on that answer. With that progression, ever going progression, do you do deload weeks after kind of maybe that 5 to 10% increase week after week after week? You kind of bring it down maybe 2 steps before you continue loading, or what is that kind of long-term progression look like?
I look for signs and symptoms for deloads. Like generally, if someone is starting, it depends on what we're doing. Generally, like there's going to be signs and symptoms that we need like to take a deload, like numbers are going down, or someone's feeling extra tired, or there's different signs that someone's going to show that we need a deload. Otherwise, if your numbers are going down, or if you're stalling, then we probably just need to change the training program. And so we'll switch to a different block, or we'll switch up the variations, or we'll switch up the rep ranges to kind of keep the programming fresh. And sometimes and we'll also decrease the volume, and that can be a deload. So I won't generally like bring down the intensity necessarily. I might just lower the volume and switch the program if that's the case.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, I'm a climber with a history of minor shoulder rotator cuff injuries, and I want to build more explosive pull arm power for bouldering. What tips do you have for keeping shoulders healthy while improving explosive pull power?
Yeah, so you're going to have to do kind of 2 different kinds of training for that. But number one, like strength is going to be your foundation for any other physical quality that you want to have. So if you want to run faster, you want to jump higher, like the stronger you are, the better you're going to be set up for that. So number one, I would say increasing your shoulder strength in general, just increasing your ability to produce force with your shoulders. So picking exercises that are going to help you do that: bench press, overhead press, pull-ups or weighted pull-ups, things like that are really going to help build your base. And then you have to get more specific with power for your upper body. And that can look like campusing, that can look like certain climbing drills that you do for explosive power in the shoulders, that can look like a lot of different things. But I would first work on building up your strength base, and then later on you can work on the power and the explosive stuff that you want to do.
Can you provide some guidance around how to program strength training together with climbing? Do you recommend separate days for climbing and strength?
Um, Generally, just for scheduling reasons, I do. I don't think it's totally necessary to do them on separate days, especially if you're auto-regulating it, because even if you are a little fatigued from, like, let's say your climbing session, you can still make the training appropriate for you if you're just going by feel after your climbing session. But I like to do it on different days just because it breaks up the session. It's not quite as long of a session, or you don't have to do like a 2 a day in that case. Although you could do your climbing in the morning and your strength training in the evening. But generally, I'll do like a strength session or a climbing training session, followed by the next day a strength session, followed by a rest day, and then a similar pattern through the week. Is like a general template that I follow. And doing it the next day, you're a little more recovered from your climbing session. So it does help kind of keep the numbers a little more consistent, because sometimes the stress can change in your climbing session and that can cause your strength numbers to fluctuate too much. And so then it's harder to tell if you're making progress or not. So having it on a separate day, or separated by several hours, like a morning session and an evening session, will get the numbers will be like a little more stable, because you're going to be a little more recovered for that. But yeah, you can do it on the same day if you want to do that, or if you don't, you have limited. I know a lot of people have limited gym access right now. Like they can only go to the gym twice because of reservations or something with COVID and everything. So in that case, you can just do it in the same session and it's fine, especially if it's auto-regulated.
What are your thoughts on warm-ups for bouldering versus sport climbing, knowing that they require different energy systems?
Yeah, I mean, I think warming up is always just going to be specific to the task that I'm doing. So, if I'm going to sport climb, I'm probably not going to warm up bouldering, but you can. You can get like a general warm up bouldering, but then you're going to need a more specific warm up for sport climbing. You're going to have to get on some sport climbs to actually warm up. Yeah, I mean, I would just do whatever thing you're going to be doing in that session is generally what I recommend. I don't recommend like a really long warm up most of the time. For me personally, like I'll get on the hangboard for a few minutes. I'm not doing like a hangboard program. I'm just warming up my fingers, and then I'm getting on the climbing wall like right away and warming up on the climbing wall specifically with climbing. And that's literally all I do for a warm up.
What's your experience with climbers who have a torn shoulder labrum and repeated dislocations? Any resources for getting strong enough to minimize dislocating?
Yeah, so that's a tricky one. So it kind of depends on how many times you've dislocated. If you have like really chronic dislocations and it's happening all the time and it's really severe, sometimes it is a case for like a surgical consultation. But labral tears are really, really common in overhead athletes, in all kinds of overhead athletes, including climbers, including volleyball players, including like any athlete that does an overhead sport where they're spending a lot of time with their arm overhead. Labral tears are actually quite common. And so shoulder pain isn't always coming from that necessarily. And a lot of climbers I personally find that I've worked with are actually like fairly hypermobile too. And I'm hypermobile. Like I have a pretty high Baden score, if you know what that means. I'm pretty hypermobile, and I have dislocated my shoulder as well. I also have a slap tear on this side, a really, really old one. But strength training has really, really helped just make my shoulders more stable. I don't get those dislocations, those subluxation dislocations anymore. But I have consulted some climbers where if it's happening a lot, it's happening really severely. Like sometimes getting a surgical consult is like the answer. But yeah, getting generally stronger. Like honestly, the strength program that I was talking about earlier that I have, that's a really good one. It incorporates a lot of upper body strength training. If you want to do it on your own, just I think incorporating like some bench pressing, learning how to do that. Overhead pressing is really specific to climbing. We're spending a lot of time over our head. Any kind of real like shoulder strength exercises are going to be good. There's so many that you could do. Those are two of my favorites, but there's a lot of other ones that you could incorporate as well. I would just spend like a good, honestly, probably 8 to 12 weeks, like just really getting stronger.
I usually have tendonitis issues on my arms in competition season. Is taking a couple months off from training and work out in the cold months a good idea, or should I keep strengthening year round?
Wait, sorry, can you repeat that one?
Sure. I usually have tendonitis issues on my arms during competition season. Is taking a couple months off from training and working out in the colder months a good idea, or should I continue to strengthen year round?
I think strengthening year round is definitely what I have people do and what I would recommend. It does take a long time to build a good strength foundation, so doing it year round is ideal. How frequently you do it and how much you do really is going to depend on your climbing season. And I highly recommend that everybody have like an off season, if possible, where you're spending more time getting stronger and doing supportive training for your climbing. I know it's really hard for some people, especially here in California. Like you can always climb somewhere like year round, or a lot of people are sport climbers during one season and boulders during another, and then a competition climber during another season. So they're like never taking any time off. So having, and I don't think you need to take a ton of time off of climbing, but you know, incorporating strength training regularly for any kind of climber is going to be good. Having an off season can be really good where you're decreasing like your intensity of how much you're climbing, your intensity and how much you're climbing can be good too. But if you're dealing with like a tendinopathy issue, like that's a dosage problem. And so you probably also just need to look at your training program and see like where you may be doing too much, like either too much intensity or too much volume, and like adjust the dosage, because you're probably just doing too much if you're getting like tendon issues. And strength training can help with that too, because it will help you build more capacity in those tendons and ligaments that we do use. But you also want to look at your training program, because if you don't fix that, then sometimes you're still going to have a problem. So
What kinds of shoulder exercises would you recommend if the classic internal-external rotation might not be effective from the Puccio photos?
yeah, there's, like I said, there's so many. I think we think of like those external internal rotations as like the go-to exercises for rotator cuff and shoulder, but literally any shoulder exercise that you do is going to strength train your rotator cuff. Like bench press not only trains your rotator cuff, but trains all of the muscles around your shoulder girdle. Overhead press not only trains your rotator cuff, but trains all of the muscles around your shoulder girdle. Rows are a great exercise. Lateral raises, upright rows, shrugs, all like front raises, all of those things are super, super good exercises for shoulder health. And they're also all rotator cuff exercises too. We don't need to isolate the rotator cuff in that way necessarily. And it doesn't even function in that way anyway, like in sport. So there are times where I will use that exercise. Like if someone specifically has like a tendon problem in that tendon, then I will isolate it and probably do some eccentrics or isometrics or something like that. But I'm also doing strength training on top of that. That's not the only thing that I'm doing with that client in general. So yeah, pretty much any shoulder exercise. If you can, I would just pick exercises that you can load the heaviest, that you like doing, and that you can progressively overload over time. And those are all going to be great for your shoulder and rotator cuff.
I understand there is little correlation between posture, form, and injury. Is there any argument for specific form or positions of shoulders, elbows when fingerboarding? I've seen you recommend bringing the chest up. Why is this?
Yeah, like we don't really have evidence for this. It hasn't been studied in climbing, so we don't know, but we do know from other sports that it doesn't seem to matter. And, you know, we can make an argument if we actually look at shoulder biomechanics that if so the shoulder is like a ball and socket joint. And so the socket of your shoulder is on your shoulder blade, and the ball of your shoulder joint is on your arm bone. So it kind of like sits in there like this. And so if you're reaching overhead or you're hanging from a hangboard with your arm overhead, but then you're thinking about pulling your shoulder blades down, then what you're essentially doing is that. You're creating more impingement in the shoulder if you're overhead and you're pulling your shoulder blades down. And that's okay. Like a little impingement in the shoulder is normal. It's not necessarily like painful for some people, but a lot of people say that you have to pull your shoulder blades down in order to like not impinge your shoulders, but that doesn't make sense because it literally impinges your shoulders more. And so when you're hanging, I wouldn't think about doing anything really specific with your shoulders. It's not actually less stress on your elbow to bend your elbow when you're hanging. It's more stress. You're using more muscle around your elbow joint to hold that position. So hanging straight is actually less stress on your elbow joint. And so the argument is bend your elbow so it's less stress on your elbow. It's actually not. And there's no compression going through your elbow when you're hanging. It's traction in your elbow. So the arguments for those positions are actually just, if you really look at them, they're not correct. And you can hang however you want. Like I know people who hang with their shoulders pulled back and down with their elbows bent. They love it. They have no problems. But I know a lot of people who hang with their elbows bent and their shoulder blades pulled back together. And a lot of times when I'm consulting climbers for elbow issues, they've been hangboarding that way. I'll just say that. Yeah, I don't think it has to be complicated. Like just hang on a straight arm. You're going to save more. You're going to conserve energy that way. The reason I say to squeeze your chest up is because that generally will get you engaged in your upper back area adequately without you overthinking what to do with your shoulder. So if I'm like, oh, I need you to pull your shoulder blades, depress your shoulder blades, like squeeze your shoulder blades, like do this and that with your shoulder blade. Like people are like, what does that mean? And they end up like overdoing the shoulder positions and stuff like that. We don't need to get like that crazy with it. So if you're hanging, just hang with the straight arm, think about keeping your chest up, you're going to be in a good position.
Yeah, it sounds like the kind of recommendation I need. I mean, too many things, and I like my brain blows up because I can't do any one at a given time.
Yeah, there's like 12 things. You're like, am I externally rotating my elbows? Am I?
Totally.
Too much.
Any further reading? This is the last question. Any further reading on RPE and auto-regulation you'd recommend? And I think you're going to send that reference list, so maybe there'll be some references about that.
I'll send the reference list, so there'll be some stuff you guys can look at there. Mike Touchier is a power lifter, and he's kind of the person who adapted RPE for strength sports. Comes from the Borg scale, which is actually for something else. He adapted it for strength training. And so if you look up Mike Touchier, he has got, it's hard to spell his name actually. So I'll make sure that I put links for you guys. He's the one that's come up with it. And he's got a lot of articles and things like that about it. It's also starting to have a lot of research around it. So I'll make sure that I link that stuff for you guys as well. So that you can look at like a reference. Barbell Medicine has some good articles about autoregulation and training as well. So you can look there. Yeah, and if you guys want to learn more about it, we can definitely do a workshop about it if enough people are interested. So
awesome. Thanks so much, Natasha. That was, yeah, super informative. I love how you started with the myths, and I think everybody got a ton out of it. Remember to tag Natasha to get entered in her giveaway for a clinic. That's huge. And tag Gnarly and look at our full lineup. Got a lot of great talks coming up from athletes and experts in their fields. And thanks so much for taking the time to come today, guys. Really
appreciate it. Having me, Shannon.
Yeah, of course. All right. Enjoy your weekend, everybody.